Hi there, Christian Henson here. I'm a nerd. It's Friday. Will you be nerding for the weekend? This episode's very much got the flavour of celebration about it. We will indulge in not just one episode of Nerding for the Weekend, but two. Today's episode and then an extra special one tomorrow. A lot of really juicy stuff to get through. What are we celebrating? Well, yesterday, big day for Spitfire, but it's a big day for this channel as well because it's our third birthday. We're now in our fourth year. It's also the end of the month for Pianobook, and we had something like 76 new free virtual instruments submitted last month. So I'm going to really do a deep dive, not one piano drop, but two today and tomorrow, looking into the stories behind them, new things that you may not have seen, and some stuff that we may have already covered in previous nerdings that I really want to dive into. Something that I've enjoyed during lockdown has been the fact that you cannot keep the music community down. The number of collaborations we're witnessing is just absolutely fantastic. And we'll be talking to two very special guests about collaborations. The queen of collaborators, Anna Phoebe, who has taken her previous life on the road and applied that to remote sessioneering. I'll also be talking to Charlie Clouser, former member of Nine Inch Nails, but also a massively esteemed composer in his own right, about what he and I actually loathe about collaborating, alongside how he's been scoring the 9th spawn of the Saw franchise. And I want to drill down into something that Charlie does. Put it this way, if his samples were beavers, they'd be terrified, because this man culls like no other. But first, what have you been up to? We see Hyldeman's journey continues with his Chronos project. We've got Patrick O'Connor's foray into the world of score videos with a beautiful piece originally released as a Pianobook demo. Brian Wells is back with another orchestral experiment. Richard Wilkinson transforms a seagull squawk into an instrument for his new Isolation album project. Native VS celebrates his first complete module rack with a Modular Monday inspired piece. And finally, Walls Vado WV uses their Korg Volca for some inspired sounds. Also, I have a very good friend, Trevor Morris, who has set up a new YouTube channel. Please check that out down below. Go along, subscribe, like, and bombard him with requests for content. Trevor, if you're watching, I'm so sorry for not having fired you a question yet. I've been a little bit snowed under. I'll get you one next week. Much love. Right. There's something I want to clear up. I always open these episodes admitting that I'm a nerd. I'm not suggesting that anyone who takes part is necessarily a nerd, possibly capable of nerdetry or nerding to a certain degree, and there's no exception here. Definitely not a nerd, but an amazing violinist first, but not foremost, because she's also a wonderful composer and most of all, a great friend. It's my great honour to introduce Miss Anna Phoebe. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm great. It's great to see you. The last time I saw you, I think, was in Edinburgh.
It was. Now, remind me where in the world you are.
So I'm in Deal on the Kent coast. So on a clear day, I can see France. I can see the cliffs.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's especially during this time, I've been so grateful for being able to go back onto the beach. You know, it's literally 20 seconds away from my front door. So just to have that space and that connection, and also to have a home studio where I can continue to sort of work and write, and just for sanity, I think it's it's been great, and I'm very grateful for that.
When you were working predominantly as a violinist, and you were very much a live violinist, weren't you, a performer?
We met, I would say, in my hustle years.
Yeah.
I was contacting people left, right and centre. I was hosting music nights. I was just going up to people in bars during gigs, and going up to people in bars and saying, you know, if I like their music, saying, do you need some strings? I'd love to record for you. I'll do it for free. I did so much work in studios with so many different people just from literally hustling. I got the gig in the USA, the working with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Again, that was a total hustle. I flew myself out for the final performance. I maxed out my credit cards. I got that gig, and that really started off the next 10 years of my career, which led to working with Roxy Music, which led to working with Ian Anderson and working with John Lord from Deep Purple up until his death. And I was always writing music and I was kind of releasing music, self-releasing as a kind of business card. But it was always very much about being live, like playing, performing. And I was touring arenas. So really learning that craft of how do you go out on stage, fronting a band, and how do you get a standing ovation by the way you move. I learned a lot in terms of performance, but in terms of playing in time and in tune, because a lot of the time I was playing in unison with guitar and keyboard in the same octave. So guitarists kind of, they pull their notes sharp. Keyboardists are obviously right there. So I learned lots of things, but musically it wasn't completely my taste in music, I would say, or where I'd come from or what I do now. Having children actually gave me the chance to kind of take a step back and focus on studio work, working on my craft at recording, producing, collaborating with people in that way, and then also taking it back to kind of the acoustic violin, being a bit more organic with structures and textures. So,
and you set up a band called Ava, which I absolutely love, which that's going very well. Obviously, there's some real stresses on this part of the music industry at the moment with what's going on. Are you guys managing to continue from afar?
We're now called Ava Waves, and that was never, when we set out playing music together, we were never thinking about developing as an artist, but it really was just about connecting with Aisling and playing violin, piano music, which was kind of an antidote to a lot of the stuff that I'd been playing before. So we ended up signing to One Little Indian, and then we ended up touring it. And that's definitely been brilliant. But I think working remotely, we've always done that anyway, because she's based in Berlin, I'm based here. And we had an intense writing session in January where we mapped out the new tracks for the new album. We're really continuing to send sessions to each other and work remotely in that way.
And actually, you've been working with the likes of Nitin Sawhney and Erland Cooper, and I imagine that you're collaborating with a number of people online. Is this something you've done kind of before the lockdown, or is this a skill that you've had to develop since?
Ever since I was touring, really, since like my early 20s, I've been working remotely, because when you're on tour, I was spending literally 8 months of the year away from home, away from a studio, with a mobile studio, literally on a tour bus in hotel rooms. So really, I've kind of been doing it from the very beginning of my career. And this is obviously just cemented that, at the moment, there is no other way to record. So I feel very comfortable with it. I think I do miss interaction.
Sure.
I think when you're gaining inspiration and create that very first bit of the creative process, I love being with someone else. But I actually quite like being on my own, to have that kind of processing segment of the creative process. I like doing that on my own, so I'm quite comfortable with working remotely.
Something that I experience in myself when I have to do remote sessions where I can't actually attend the remote session. Someone will be representing me on my behalf down in London. They get far more interesting stuff than I do, because they really cover all the bases, and the musician really wants to cover all the bases. Whereas I don't know if you recall this, when we worked together, I'm almost kind of apologetic and I'm just so concerned that I'm not seen to be exploiting and all of that kind of stuff, that I tend to power through and not go, I still don't think we're there yet. Let's do another.
I totally know what you mean, because I have to say, when I do remote sessions for someone else, where it's literally I'm hired as a session player, I will go above and beyond in terms of what I'm delivering. So if it's someone, say working with Aisling, or even working with Nitin now, or Erland, people who I've got sort of a long-term collaboration with, I kind of know what the filter of that project is. I'm kind of almost, as I'm recording, I'm listening with their ear, and I'm delete, edit. I already kind of know, because I've got that mindset. But when I'm doing sessions for someone who I don't know, I think I'm much more inclined to spend way longer on it and really do loads of takes. And, there'll be like a session, and I'll be much neater about how I present the session. And if you're working for someone else, it's very hard unless you know that person. And probably for you, if you're getting people to do sessions for you, sometimes you don't know what you want until you're in that room with someone and they're giving you a take. And it might be something so subtle that you might... can you breathe into that? It's hard to say that in an email.
So, Anna, as someone who has done this for a while and is we're all having to do it a bit more, I'm sure people really relish your top tips for collaborating. So maybe you getting stuff that goes into your computer, and how vice versa, when maybe someone's just hiring you, how to then provide them with stuff from your computer, if you know what I mean.
It really stems down to what the parameters of each collaboration are. So if for instance, take Nitin Sawhney, for instance, at the moment. I do sessions for him. I go into the studio, or at the moment I'm here. He's written the notes. I have the MIDI files. I get sheet music. I have to still know what his message is. You know, what's the feeling of this track? You still have to understand what the narrative is, or whatever you're doing a session for. But ultimately it's his words, and I'm interpreting his music and his narrative. So that's very different to another session. At the moment I'm co-writing with him on a track for his album. So I actually said, he's given me his piano part, and I really have to sit to write the top line. We're still collaborating, but it's a totally different relationship. And I think knowing what the relationship is, if I'm asking for someone to collaborate with me, just recently I'm working with a poet called Selena Godin. I'm not going to control her side of the collaboration, which is her words, the message. And that because she's dealing in lyrics, she's defining what the parameters are. So really, I'm taking her words and I'm providing the musical narrative for it. But at the same time, I can kind of do whatever I want within the parameters of her message. I think it's really difficult to define, but I think it depends whether you're doing a session, whether it's a collaboration, and then within that collaboration, everyone has their specific areas within that relationship, and being very respectful of what those are.
What I've never really asked is for a director to define the boundaries of that collaboration. What is the purpose of the music? And so often I just go piling in. Yeah, it reminds me of what Terry Gilliam once said, is you've got to keep, in reference to film composers, you've got to keep those fuckers close because they can really change shit up. And I guess by not establishing the role of the collaboration, you're going to tread on each other's toes.
For me, that is absolutely key. So, for instance, at the moment, I'm collaborating with the European Space Agency. So I'm taking their data from their Earth observation data on climate crisis, and I'm providing a musical response. So at the whole point of whenever I've been releasing any music, when I'm writing it, I'm always asking, what is it that you would like me to say with the music, or support, or expose? Absolutely
stunning stuff. If you've not checked out Anna's work, linked below is all sorts of links to just an amazing body of work that's being built here. Anna, thanks so much for joining us today. Are you okay to come back tomorrow to talk about Rosemary's
definitely.
Baby? So if you haven't had a chance to see Rosemary's Baby, we'll now be doing that tomorrow. It's well worth catching up with. I'm sure both Anna and Charlie are going to have fascinating insights into this masterpiece. Also, it's a bit tricky because I forgot that it was by Polanski. So this raises some interesting questions there that I'll pose to Anna and Charlie. We'll also be listening to After the Rain by Barry Guy, which hopefully, if you can dig out, you'll agree is a rare, uncovered gem. Right, next up is a good friend from afar, a enormously successful film composer working on the immense, sprawling Saw franchise alongside many really high-end multi-episodic TV series. It's a true honour to present to you a Mr. Charlie Clouser. How are you doing, Charlie?
I'm good.
So you're in California.
And we're already in the heat of summer has descended on us in about the past week, so air conditioning is on.
Now, something I've been saying to a lot of people who've been asking me, how are you in lockdown? I say, well, I've been kind of in lockdown for about 25 years. Do you find your life has changed massively?
It really hasn't. It's not like I leave this room very often anyway. And, both my wife and I work from home, so we're always here anyway. It's not a huge change. I really feel for folks that are either out on tour and rely on, performing live for their bread and butter,
sure,
or for people who have a big team of interns and assistants or work in a studio where there's people hustling and bustling and rubbing shoulders in the hallways. I can only imagine that this whole situation has put a much bigger crimp in their style than solo hermits like me and you.
I kind of dabbled into the route of kind of working with more people, and I guess it was quite a difficult thing to have to admit because it doesn't particularly reflect well on you as a character trait, but I'm not a very good collaborator. I find collaborating with directors okay, but musically I tend to want to be more of an auteur. I don't want to tar you with the same brush, but was that a kind of conscious decision for you to work alone?
I mean, that was a struggle I had in the years of working with Nine Inch Nails. It wasn't as collaborative as some musical endeavors are, but it was never, there's always 2 or 3 people in the control room fiddling around. You'd have Alan Moulder there behind the SSL, Trent with a guitar in his lap, somebody else behind the computer, and maybe a fourth person helping to plug and unplug guitar pedals. And I was always more happy going up to my studio at the second floor of the building and just chipping away at the block of marble by myself, where you don't feel embarrassed or like you're wasting anybody else's time if you go down some dusty trail that proves to be a dead end. When you're working by yourself, you're free to spend 45 minutes trying to make a hi-hat sound on a ARP 2600 only to have it end in tears and throw it away and start over again on a different path. And you don't feel like you've wasted anybody's time but your own. I don't mind wasting my own time. It's akin to the old chestnut about not liking old school recording studios because of the sense of the clock ticking. And it's the same for me when collaborating with other people. A lot of times I always feel like there's some clock ticking. I feel bad for wasting their time as I experiment on an idea that might not work out. And that affects how risky you'll be with your experimentation with your time, because it's their time as well.
You're an archetypal kind of soundsmith, sound maker. And I don't think all composers are that. Speaking to Hans recently, he said that he really does believe sound contains emotion as much as music does. And I think that's what you do is you create sounds that have a visceral kind of sense to them. You stick the rusty screwdriver in with the sound, and then you twist it with the music. I don't know if that's a fair description of...
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. And some of my favorite music, not music I've done, but other people's music, is simplistic and minimal in terms of the amount of note-on events that it contains, and in terms of the harmonic and the musical elaborateness of the underlying musical data.
Yeah.
Most of my favorite stuff is simplistic from that view, but contains more than makes up for it in the emotional qualities of the sound and their articulation. And so much of like Johan Johansson's stuff is it. Maybe I'm completely reading it wrong, but it seems like the music that he did for the movie Prisoners, which was a fantastic movie and fantastic, super minimalist score, and Sicario, it didn't contain elaborate harmonic movement and inner voicings, and it wasn't from a musical conservatory standpoint, it didn't seem like it was complex, but and of course it's serving the film, so it can't be just this flowery explosion of flourishes, but it never felt lacking, and it felt like there was just such a rich quality to the way he wove the sounds together that it never left me wanting more calories,
Yeah.
And there's another one of Alexander Desplat's great scores, which kind of doesn't get much attention, was for the movie Syriana.
Yeah.
Which was that George Clooney Middle East.
You're the second person to have mentioned this recently. My dad was in that. He played the senator with the really terrible Kentucky accent.
Really?
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go back and watch it.
He played an Everly Brother once back in 1900 and Frozen to Death, and managed to do this Kentucky accent, which I didn't buy.
The moment in Syriana where the terrorists drive their boat with the bomb on it and there's a huge explosion. It's the climax of this terrorist plot, and they're going to blow up an entire harbor with this bomb. And as the boat approaches the final explosion, the sound design of all these, it's a sort of fleet of little fishing boats. The sound goes quieter and quieter, and the music fills in the gap, but the music doesn't get bigger. It's just becomes this quiet, super minimalist thing, and at the climactic moment, there's just a single piano note on the explosion. It doesn't contain 1,000 elements that had to be wrestled into place, but what's there is just this perfect small thing that has a massive effect because of its simplicity.
I think it's far better that instead of sitting down writing as much complexity as you possibly can, trying to show off your chops, it's far better to spend the same time writing less notes but better ones put in a better order.
Are you by any chance a music professor? Because that sounds like a master class.
But I think a very good example of this is I've been sitting out, during lockdown. I've been spending a lot of time in the garden with the radio playing or Spotify. And you've got all of these neoclassical playlists which don't offend family members. And it's very interesting to hear the difference between with the Olafers and the Johanns and the Niels Frahms, along with the also-rans. Because, okay, yes, what Olafer has done there appears to be simplistic, but he's sweated those notes. So they, as I say, they twist the screw. And then you'll listen to some things, you're like, okay, it's not just about miking a felt piano nicely and then just letting shit fall out of your hands. You've got to make this stuff work. And I think that again ties into this patience thing. I think if you were sitting there creating a massive symphony with all of this stuff, people will give you the time of day. But if you're going, I want this hi-hat to mean something, there to be a point to it.
Those minimal pieces that we're talking about that work so well, I would like to think that it wasn't just sort of stroking one's chin and deciding which note to play and then playing it. I would hope that there were a lot of notes which were played and then removed or erased, or driven your car around them, as opposed to just, I think this one, ding. I would hope that there's this trial and error, and that it's as much pulling of teeth as it is when you're doing a more elaborate piece that has a million note-on events that have to be woven together. Of course, I listened to something like a John Powell How to Train Your Dragon score, which is incredibly elaborate in spots, and I think those are still styles of music which I have no idea how it gets made and what the ingredients are.
It's interesting. I had a friend who was working on a commission recently and was really struggling with this one section and said it's missing something, it's not quite working. And I said, no, you just need to mute that. And suddenly it all came together. And I think that subtraction is, if you're having to layer stuff up, I think you're often just digging yourself into a bigger hole. And obviously being a massive synth head, you understand that subtraction is always the way to go.
The biggest part of my whole process of whether it's making records or composing scores is just a case of no, maybe, no. And it's not so much inspiration from the ground up, it's chopping it down from the top down, like having a great big ass tree and cutting off 3/4 of the branches and winding up with just this little stub that's hopefully well shaped and is, turn a giant sequoia down into the bust of Beethoven or whatever. It's just the stump that's left after you've carved off all this stuff that you didn't want.
So one of the parts of the areas which have affected our industry is productions being put into hiatus. And are you one of those people who is kind of on hiatus, or did you manage to get a score through the door like that bit in Indiana Jones with the hat?
That's exactly what happened. We squeaked out the score to the 9th Saw movie.
Wow.
Which is a departure from previous movies in many ways, but we managed to finish mixing it, I think, March 18th was our last day on the dub stage. They were dubbing in Canada, and while I was still here in this very room, frantically tweaking and finishing cues and shoveling them up to the dub stage, minutes before they would arrive at that point in the film. But we did manage to get it out the door and in the can. It was supposed to be in theaters next week. It was supposed to hit theaters May 15th. And of course, they've pushed that back to some date far in the future.
You've done 9 of them now, and they are the definition of not only the film material, but your scores are the definition of intense. Do you find you need to kind of take a break from that kind of trope, that kind of genre, or do you do those back to back?
The first 7 of them, we did 1 a year. And that was during the phase when I was also, during the winter months, I was doing 2 TV series, 2 weekly series. So I'd have to choke out 23 episodes of those. And those were absolutely wall-to-wall score. And they were, hour-long network time slot, so it's 42 minutes of score, basically. Although somehow I would seem to do 44 minutes of score for a 42-minute episode every week. So I would do those during the winter, and then every summer do a Saw movie and one other random movie.
Okay.
So for a while, we were doing them more or less back-to-back, and it almost was like doing a TV series where you didn't have time to forget what you'd done the last time before another one was being slipped under the door for you to get to work on. Then we had a bit of a gap before the last kind of 2 or 3 that we've done. And that it's nice to let the audience rest for a minute and let us rest as well. And this latest installment, which is actually titled Spiral from the Book of Saw, it was Chris Rock, the comedian Chris Rock, who came to the producers and said, I've got an idea for how to flip this franchise on its head, still using the aspects of the story and the characters and the legacy that they built with the earlier movies. But it's not just another Saw movie that takes place in some dank dungeon where people are, strapped to a machine that's going to rip them apart or whatever. You have Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson and Marisol Nichols, and it's just a great. It's a great example of why I could never be a screenwriter, because I would never have thought of how to reinterpret and to refer to the legacy with love and respect, but to also take it somewhere completely different. And that informed kind of how I approached the score, because this movie takes place outside in the world, not in some dungeon, some trap. So that's a different palette of sounds that have to work in that. Underground dungeon nighttime sounds are, to me anyway, are very different to broad daylight sounds,
And the sound palette that you create for your productions, obviously the Saw was, I remember seeing some very old rigs that you had to have just in case you had to go back a few films to grab something they'd tempt. I remember Daniel Lanois saying he creates sounds all the time and he has them in little orphanages and he hopes to find them homes one day. Is that something you do, or do you just very much set to work creating a sound palette?
There's always a phase of recording things for the project, but then there's, even if you think you know what you're setting out to do, on your way to that sonic destination, you create other stuff which isn't right for what you're trying to do, but is too good to not use someday. So much like how you described Daniel's approach, I wind up with these not orphanages, but like temporary hostels, I guess, where Airbnb for sounds, where you park them in a folder that's not buried somewhere, but is at a top level, and my code word for that is the to be pillaged file. That I sort of have this top level folder where I put things that aren't suitable for that thing that I was working on that day, but need to be kept at the front of my consciousness and used and deployed not years down the road, but that was too good to not use, so let's put it right here. That folder is at the top of my list so that I always remember to look in there first when I'm looking for new inspiration along the way. The
last time I think I saw you in person, you said that you were busy because you were catching up with all your Black Friday purchases, and that's you archiving sounds.
If I have some downtime, I'll be idly clicking away, watching cartoons on the TV while just clicking the buy it now button, especially on Black Friday when some of these sample libraries are are drastically reduced. And I wind up finding stuff that I like in weird nooks and crannies and inexpensive sample libraries done by one-man shops. One lucky find was this, I think he's Italian, and I think his company's called Silence and Other Sounds. Yeah. And he made these sort of grab bag sample libraries, not elaborate contact instruments at all, just very simple, sort of 88 one-shot samples across the keyboard of weird cello scrapes and other, horror kind of stabs. And I stumbled on one of his libraries, and they're cheap and cheerful, $49 for a grab bag of tortured violin sounds. And there was just they were really harsh and off the wall and nasty in a great way, and not the type of thing, sort of the other end of the spectrum from the type of thing you find in, Albion 4, Uist. How do you say it?
Uist.
The same category of sounds at their origin, but in a dry, nasty, one mic up front, harsh approach. But my general process when I get a new influx of sounds is to just ruthlessly roll through them and right then and there make a snap decision and delete anything that isn't amazing. You know, if it's a contact instrument, a lot of times it's more difficult to open the hood and start throwing stuff away. So I'll use the NKIs as a means of whittling it down. Duplicate the instruments folder and then zip it so I can get it back if I need to. But then in the unzipped version, I'll ruthlessly go through and just throw away the NKIs that load up sounds I don't want. I do get very organized about making sure that when a new cache of sounds comes in, I'll roll through them all and I'll listen to them all. But right then, and not putting it off till later, I'll get rid of that which isn't amazing. And after so many years, you kind of develop a sense of what you might use.
What has
and
mileage.
I don't have to second guess myself. I can just, if it's a grab bag of just wave samples of weird string, cello torture effects, I can easily just roll through it in a program like Audio Finder or something, just a previewing app, and just go, no, ooh, like that one. No, and I drag them to the trash and empty the trash and on to the next. And that just saves you that hard drive bloat factor where you open up a folder and you go, oh, groan. How am I going to find what I want?
But of course, Charlie, you're also an EXS24 fanboy, are you not? So there
Yes,
might be a little bit of a
still.
migration of libraries onto that platform.
There's only so far you can go with EXS. By no means is it a competitor to Contact. As you know, like for doing anything involving multiple mic positions or true legato transitions or anything more fancy than you could do on like an Akai S1100 or whatever.
Yeah.
But so much of what I do is fine with that approach. A lot of if you have, and this goes back to our earlier part of the conversation, if the sound itself contains an amazing amount of emotion or information, then you can get away with just having one sample, Fairlight CMI style, and you play it up here and it sounds like high violins, and you play it down here and it sounds like the most evil groaning low drone you've ever heard. And a lot of what I do is that approach where it's just a single sound that's an amazing sound, but just spread across the keyboard. And that's why my template is, I did finally just rebuild my template recently, and now it's 768 instances of EXS24.
Bloody hell.
Which loads like that. Because, with Logic, now it loads tracks in disabled mode, and EXS is so lightweight anyway that I can load my template, and it literally loads in less than 5 seconds because everything's disabled. And then as you click on a track, it re-enables them. But because they're EXS, they re-enable almost instantly, and it's a very lightweight, despite the sheer number of sounds, it's a very lightweight way to work.
Right, Charlie, well, I look forward to catching up with you tomorrow to talk about Rosemary's Baby and After the Rain. But talking of culling, you may have to cull some space on your hard drives after you see this. My highlights of the month at Pianobook and the stories that people have been telling, split between today and tomorrow. Right, we've got 12 to get through over the next couple of days, but it's not going to be a problem. These are deeply inspiring and brilliant samples. So listen, Pianobook has kind of become a victim of its own success, and I'm going to have a bit of a housekeeping memo for you tomorrow. So do join us. There's basically a couple of steps that quite a lot of people are missing that is making the process really difficult for us. So if you tune in back tomorrow, I'll just take you through a couple of things. It's not a massive nag, it's just there's something that's being forgotten to be done quite frequently, and without it makes it really difficult for us to get these things up. The Hoffman, Anders, this is just one of those just incredibly inspiring pianos, and it used to belong to the Swedish Broadcast Corporation. Anders bought it back in 2010 when they were relocating studios. Over the years, the piano has been used in endless productions, but right before I got it, the Malmö Opera House used it for choir practice. And this is where things take a turn for the worst. In 2019, Anders and family moved homes, and you moved studios, Anders. To make bookkeeping easier, you hired different companies to move your stuff. Wonderful for the family and one for your studio. Little did you know, the moving of the personal belongings went great, but things didn't go well for Anders poor Hoffman. And he says that he really regrets not having sampled it more thoroughly, not sure how best to go about restoring it. One of the things I really enjoy, one of the most romantic things about Pianobook, is that we're not only sampling our pianos to share with other members of the community, we're also capturing moments in history. See, pianos are a living thing. It's not just pianos that get damaged or dropped. They respond to the seasons differently. So that's why I have a winter piano and a spring piano, the same piano, because it adopts different characteristics depending on its surroundings, how people have played it. Instruments bear the scars of everyone who's played them. And I think that's what's so magical, that we can then play those scars. To this neoclassical piece recently, and he had a super rich bottom end, and I'm absolutely sure it was a bit of sub bass. I'm just going to try that. Nice, a little bit of rumble there. We have a Yamaha S400B, and I really like this piano because it's nice and bright. This is from Kev Hay. Story, so it was another boiling hot Christmas in the Southern Hemisphere. I don't know how you guys do that. I just couldn't do Christmas in the heat. Anyway, the studio was closed, not to me, quiet and ready to be used. I jumped in, set up some mics and went to town. She's bright, if you want it that way, reasonably clean and well presented from two vastly different listening positions. Sometimes you just have to try out things that you haven't before, and that was one of those times. Bravo, here, and here it is. So it's got this, must be different mics here. Oh, lovely. Good as I think we imagine with a massive tail. Honor guitarette. This looks good. Created by Klaus Wagner or Wagner. I'm so overwhelmed by the Pianobook community that I also want to contribute some instruments. Well, thank you, Klaus. Because I gave my piano to a good friend for his children to learn to play, you're a good man. I begin with an instrument which sounds a little bit like an electric piano. It's my oldest electroacoustic instrument called the Honor guitarette from 1963, 1 year younger than me. It is a lamellophone with a built-in pickup played with the fingers. To me, it is all of those things you say. It could be a Fender, it could be a Celeste of some sort, it could be a kalimba, but it's none of those things. Therefore, you don't really immediately attach it with a trope or a genre or a stereotype, if you will. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Klaus. Quarantine Piano, another one that I've been really enjoying playing. Created by Marco Belloni. Unfortunately, I don't really have a fancy story for my piano. It's a piano like many others out there, a fantastic refurbished Yamaha U3 my father bought about 15 years ago for me to take piano lessons. Since this is the one and only real piano I've ever owned, it's indeed very special to me. The best piano I could ever hope to have. The U3 is an amazing piano. The original Spitfire Labs soft piano, linked below, is a U3. The weight of each key, the mechanical noises, and that rich full sound I could never get from my older digital piano. The U3, if I remember correctly, because I sampled one in the Hall Air Studios last year, more news on that soon actually. It's a big old bugger, if I remember that correctly. I love it. It's got what I refer to as home tunings. I wonder what it would sound like with Anders' piano, because there's a similarity in sound between them. So maybe if we just kind of put them like that. It's just such good stuff. It really is. Just amazing. String textures from Angus Roberts Carey, formerly of Arc Samples, now a member of the Spitfire family, but still very much part of the Pianobook community as well. This library is donated to Pianobook to thank the community for their support. Well, thank you, Angus. In the final year of my undergraduate year at Falmouth University, I organised a string ensemble to record some live parts for one of my film compositions. Lots of lovely credits there to the contributors and an absolutely stunning piece of work here, Angus. Suspicions that if we go to Naughty Land, a bit of reverb and a bit of the old sub bass, things are about to get a little bit ominous. I'm going to have fun this weekend. Don't know about you guys. Right. Last one today. I just love how kind of utilitarian this is, but how wonderful it sounds. A sample instrument by Yannick Reich. Excuse me again, as always, if I'm pronouncing your names wrong. A long time ago, I was really bored whilst eating my lunch. So as normal people do, I started hitting my wrist bone with a knife. Has a really horrific quality that I like, but again, it's that great thing when you sample stuff that's unfamiliar. It does the job of a Celeste, but without immediately taking you to Hogwarts. I love using this for these type of instruments. Just a little bit of schnufter there. So, as I mentioned earlier, in celebration of this channel's third year, 50,000 subscribers, Pianobook, brilliant record-breaking month last month, and also all of the magic stuff that Spitfire Audio got up to yesterday, this is a two-parter. So join us tomorrow for more insights from the fantastic Anna Phoebe and Charlie Clouser, but also another deeper, bigger Pianobook piano drop. Thanks, as always, for watching. Surely churlish not to have subscribed if you haven't done already, and a dingage of the bell to be notified when our next video goes up. One of those for Anna, Charlie, and all the fantastic contributors. Have a wonderful evening and see you again tomorrow.